Hello, everyone. Hi. Hope you enjoyed the opening keynote for the first day at Access Lab. My name is Rob Skaisbrook. I'm the head of global sales and partnerships at OpenAthens. And I'm here to introduce the next session. So the next session is titled, What is an Identity Federation and how does OpenAthens enable participation? We'll be hearing from two different people. First from Mark Williams, who is the Identity Verification Services Manager at Jisc, and Sam Neate, who is an implementation specialist within OpenAthens. So Mark's going to give us a bit of an overview of the UK Federation and how that kind of enables participation for institutions and for publishers. Sam's then going to take us through a recent implementation that he's worked on with Falmouth University, and he'll kind of discuss how he collaborated with the UK Federation team throughout that process.
From Jisc. I'm the UK Federation Manager. Apologies for this not being live, but the question and answer afterwards will be. So what's an identity federation? Well, it's a few things, but first of all, it's a legal trust framework to allow all the participants to follow a clear set of rules. And in this case, a lot of those rules focus on either protecting the privacy of the end user or protecting the actual valuable resources that they'll be accessing. Secondly, as a technical infrastructure to allow its members to talk to each other through metadata and SAML attributes. And finally, it's a support desk. It's there to help you with the technical side of participating, registering entities, and running the software you'll be operating. And helping with other questions such as attribute release, which I'll go into in a moment. The Federation has over 1,000 members, pretty much all of higher education and further education. Over 300 commercial service providers, and through participation in EduGain, which is the sort of federation of federations, literally thousands of institutions and other publishers around the globe. The way it works is that the typical end user will go to a resource, say Science Direct, and click on Access, and then they're redirected to their home institution's login screen to authenticate. And in the background, a set of attributes about that user are sent in a SAML profile from the institution to the service provider. And that determines if, according to the license, they should be let into the resource. So essentially, the institution is saying, this is one of our users, and the service provider is hopefully saying, that's cool, come on in. The institution is vouching for its user, and the service provider is trusting that assurance. What is not happening is that any personal identifiable information is by default being sent by the institution. The institution is saying, we know this user, but we're not sending any more details. Those details can be sent if the user consents, or in a special case where both parties have signed up to the research and scholarship attribute, which is essentially about collaborative research tools, which require personalization and also implicit trust. It allows the use of complicated attributes, staff, alumni, student. This allows granular access decisions. So licenses can be more sophisticated, and an institution with, say, a small law department and a science-based institution, they might be able to leverage a lower access cost due to the size of the law cohort, which they can identify to the publisher in their license. The technical side is all based around SAML standards. To enable all this to happen, to talk to each other, to participate in UK Federation, institutions need to deploy what's called an identity provider, and publishers do essentially the same thing, but it's called a service provider piece of software. It's the SAML standard which is important. The variations of software, Shibboleth, OpenAthens, etc., they're just flavors. Although Jisc operates a federation on behalf of the UK community, we really don't care what flavor you use. We just want users to be able to access their content, so it's your choice what you do. We just want it to all work through SAML. Shibboleth is obviously the first one which comes to mind. Just contributes to the funding of this open source non-proprietary code, and institutions and publishers can download it and register in the UK Federation for free. But I suspect that if you're actually at this event, that's probably not the option you're actually looking to choose. You obviously can do it yourself, but you may have a different preferred option. And that could be to speak to Jisc. And we have a trust and identity consultancy team who will actually use that same code, but could deploy it for you. This is a chargeable service, but it might save you staff time in the long run. partly because of all the projects Jisc has run in the past, there's an awful lot of third parties out there now whose staff actually gained experience on those projects. So they've got lots of a shibboleth experience. So again, a third party option is one available to you. And of course, we've got another Jisc option, and that's, you know, the one we have here at this event, OpenAthens, which is its own SAML compliant software, which can be registered in the UK Federation. I really don't care which option you go for. All we want to see is as many people as possible getting connected. Get quotes, speak to everyone. There is no one size fits all solution. Prices will differ, functionality will differ. Get what suits your institution and your use case. Pretty much the same thing applies to publishers. Some will want to do it in-house, some via consultancy, and some via aggregators. Again, it's a level playing field. Make the choice that suits you. So that's the technology side. That's only one part of the story. Both institutions and publishers also need to make the access experience the best for the user. A major part of access is what we call the discovery phase, and this is different from the idea of discovery library content. It's basically discovering where you're coming from. When a publisher asks where the user is from, so they can direct the end user back to the correct institution, well, the UK Federation has a page to help this happen. It's called the WAIF, Where Are You From page, or Central Discovery Service. But we actually prefer to publishers to download some software and run that page themselves. Then they can limit, say, for example, the drop-down list which might appear to institutions which subscribe to their resource, rather than, in the worst case, somebody having to pick through 800. Institutions can also play the part. They can generate what we call a waifless URL, particularly using a Jisc tool called Woojin. A waifless URL is essentially a link which the user clicks on in the library resource page, and it tells the resource they're going to where that user is coming from. And that effectively is what helps and permits single sign-on. So when a user clicks on a waifless link, they go to resource. If they're signed into the institution, they don't have to do it again. And then when they go from resource to resource, they don't have to keep entering their credentials. And this is particularly useful these days because it leaves them much less open to the sort of phishing attacks we see where pirates are trying to harvest user credentials. And these access permissions, getting the right attributes released from the databases, ensure end users get access to the correct resources. As we looked at student, we looked at member, we looked at alumni, etc. So a Jisc service such as Verifid, and that's the one where we provide a service to commercial student discount providers to authenticate students so they can access discount deals. If you can ensure that, for example, the student attribute is released when applicable, rather than just say the generic member, this often enables the commercial discount providers to leverage better deals for their students and get much more favorable offers. And obviously, Shibboleth and OpenAthens both allow this level of granularity. You decide, the institution decides what attributes you want to release for a certain type of user to a certain type of service provider. Defining the student attribute well will also enable students to use a student voter registration service. This is one where they can sign in from the home institution and register to vote in local and national elections. The details are picked up by the councils, and this is particularly important in, for example, England, where supporting student registration has actually been mandated by the Office of Students, but it's something we've rolled out UK-wide. And finally, most of Jisc's resources, the licenses, and things such as free ebooks for FE, they're all predicated on federated access. And running an identity provider or service provider, as I've described, is really the entry level requirement for participation if you're an institution or a publisher. And now I'm going to hand over to OpenAthens. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mike. So my name is Sam, and I'm part of the technical solutions team at OpenAthens. We're responsible for onboarding customers onto the OpenAthens platform and catering a product to each of their requirements, as they do differ from customer to customer. And also we look at ways to improve the onboarding process using the tools that we have available, ensuring that they get the most value from their product, and just to make it sure it's as pain-free as possible. So I'll be presenting a short run through of the different access methods that OpenAthens uses. And also I've got a short case study on a current project that I'm working on that shows the relevant uses of the OpenAthens Federation as well as the UK Federation in order to enhance the customer's experience while using the product. So how do we connect to publishers? This is something that probably everyone's familiar with, but I'll just do a short run through just to show how it's relevant to our customer case study that we've got today. So access to online resources through OpenAthens works in the exact same way as it does any shibboleth server. There's two legs to it. One part is our integration with the customer's user directory, which is often held within Microsoft Active Directory or Azure, but we can integrate through APIs or the SAML authentication protocol with Google Workspace or Salesforce or many number of other providers. And the second part of this is our connection from OpenAthens to online resources. And this is done through federation access through OpenAthens, the UK Federation, or in common. We also support a managed proxy service from OpenAthens for IP authentication, and also direct SAML connections with providers where required, where they're not in a federation. And this works as if you've created a federation type access, but there's only two members in it, yourself and the publisher that you're connecting to. So looking at the customer requirement that we had for this project, we were tasked with removing the system management burden from the IT services role. They wanted to remove that burden that was often placed only on one person who knew how to administer it. They did want to remain anonymous, but they have provided some quotations just to enhance the reasonings behind them moving to OpenAthens, and also provide some feedback on their journey thus far. So looking at the existing setup that they've been using prior to OpenAthens, they're maintaining several pieces of on-premise equipment for the purpose of identity management. They had a Shibboleth IDP server and also ran Shibboleth SP to manage some printing services and also a music and video database. And they also have EasyProxy, which takes identity management from the Shibboleth server as well. And the EasyProxy server manages IP authentication where they don't have any resources, where they don't have the resource running through the UK Federation already. So looking at how we would move this customer over to OpenAthens in a seamless and pain-free way, we integrate with multiple federations and manage our own proxy service. So a lot of the existing on-premise equipment, we can mimic the functions of that and switch the connections one by one. And already having these connections set up where we can integrate with the UK Federation means we can test everything prior to go live and mitigate any of the problems that we might experience while doing so. And especially during such a crucial time for online learning, we want to minimize any disruption that a user or librarian may experience while onboarding with us. So the identifier that is used within the UK Federation would be copied across to us when we were migrating from a UK Federation customer. This replication means that when it comes to doing the migration, all we have to submit is a short piece of information that changes the endpoint from the Shibboleth server over to OpenAthens. And what we just need to do before the migration date is test access from OpenAthens to the online resources and make sure attribute releases are working and all of the functions of online are kept the same as they were from the Shibboleth server. And we also hooked in all the direct communication to the online on-premise Shibboleth servers, including the EasyProxy server that they had. So when it came time to migrate over, all we did was sit ourselves where the on-premise server was previously within the map. So replicating all of the functions that everything else was doing, including the one-to-one connections, it means all the users would have the exact same user experience when the migration happened, and most likely not even notice that anything had changed. So from there, once we'd set ourselves where the on-premise server was, we then moved to targeting the EasyProxy services and upgrading those to SAML or Federation access where possible. So phase 2, which is currently in progress, this is our eventual look at the customer from when we'd have everything fully moved over. So we've got our integration with the OpenAthens Federation and the UK Federation, as well as the proxy service. Anything where we can't upgrade the proxy to OpenAthens or UK Federation access, we would support them through our own managed proxy service. This does sometimes require a migration of IP addresses with that publisher, but with any luck, that's something done very pain-free because we can set that up for a particular day. And also any providers where they also have UK Federation access set up simultaneously with proxy access, we can then switch out the links that push access through EasyProxy and move those to a prefix link that moves the traffic through OpenAthens instead. So by gradually swapping these out through a libraries learning link system, we can move access over gradually and deal with any problems that might arise. But as I said earlier, we can mimic everything the existing services were doing already, so we can mitigate any problems before they arise. So what did the customer get from doing this? So they've removed several pieces of IT equipment on site that required specialist knowledge to administer. We've moved legacy proxy connections over to a more secure and flexible SAML authentication method, and further members of their IT team could be trained to make quality of life changes and work with OpenAthens on any service enhancement requests. The migration was done with the bare minimum of users disruption. The ability to replicate shibboleth access through the UK Federation prior to even making any changes means that potential issues have been mitigated before they've even appeared, and that we've tested access to everything and confirmed that OpenAthens will work in the exact same way that their shibboleth implementation was working previously. And we did this by using the same entity ID that I mentioned earlier. And the customer is now also a member of 2 federations, meaning that any publisher that's not present in either can also be easily onboarded with no extra work down the road. Registration within the UK Federation is free and available to most of the customers that sign up to OpenAthens, and it's something that we'd always encourage when people join. It's a great way for them to expand their pool of available resources and requires minimal input from the customer. And with OpenAthens maintaining the shibboleth access itself, then they don't have to do any further work in terms of configuring access to that federation. And also, as the case study shows, it allowed us to work with much more flexibility when performing a migration, and gives us the options of doing pieces of migration in a phased approach, meaning that we can test and then do things slowly instead of moving everything over at once, meaning less disruption for the users and also the library staff who are our customers. And so thanks very much for listening, and we'd just like to switch over to a question panel if possible.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Mark. So we've had a few questions come in as you guys have been presenting. So let me go for the first one. So the first one is, it says, concerning the use of Google or the Google Workspace for an identity provider, is there a way to integrate a Google account chooser so that a patron isn't inadvertently identified with their personal Google account rather than the institutional Google account? Our patrons experience the Google exploding robot when that happens. I guess I'll go for you first, Sam. Is that something that you can answer?
Potentially. I know I come across that option myself because I have my own personal Google account and a work one for access to applications. Often I do just get presented with a Wayfinder type view where it asks me to select which account I'd like to log in with. So I think that's something that'd be down to Google. And it seems that personally, in my experience anyway, when you do have 2 accounts that are signed in, it will ask you to choose which one to authenticate with. So as long as you choose the correct one, you shouldn't get to the robot error of not having correct permissions or something. But if that's constantly happening, that'd be something either to look in with Google, I suppose, or the identity provider sending the request there.
Okay. Anything to add on that, Mark?
No, I mean, obviously, we wouldn't expect to be doing that via the SSO in UK Federation, but just a reminder that obviously IDPs don't send personalized email addresses or your institutional email address to for service providers, except if they have the research and scholarship attribute, which is, for example, some higher education institutions and CERN, so high-level research, where the institution has said, yes, we trust this research facility to, they need it for personalization, and we trust that. But by default, that won't be happening.
Okay, thanks both. So the next question, so I think this one's for you, Mark. So they say, we constantly have to tell a publisher site that, yes, we are from the site you are expecting. The first page we come to is always one that says, you don't appear to have access, log in over here. And then as soon as we go over there and choose the correct institution, it then recognizes us. And the question is, could this be anything to do with how we are set up within the UK Federation?
I suspect it's more about the publisher UX, and I think at the end of the day, you've got awards for the best UX. Maybe we should have one for the worst. A couple of things on my radar at the moment are publishers where it seems like you've got a login flow, but they're asking you for personalization. you don't have to give it. And if they are asking you for personalization like that and demanding it, speak to us, because we might have issues with Jisc collections because they shouldn't be doing it that way. And in UK Federation, we're certainly recommending against that. So I suspect it's about the publisher discovery flow, but just seriously drop us an email about this specific instance to service@ukfederation.org.uk, and we'll check.
Okay, fantastic. I guess, I mean, I suppose as publishers start to adopt the sort of seamless access login journey, then these sorts of issues potentially start to kind of dissipate. I mean, I'd recommend anybody who hasn't kind of had a read of the latest information around seamlessaccess.org, that kind of gives you the information around how they're redesigning that login process to try and avoid, pretty much what was illustrated here as a challenge. Cool. Okay. So next question. What's the best way to set up a separate IDP for alumni since they are no longer part of our ADFS? Sam, do you want to have a go at this?
Yeah, sure. So as well as hooking in accounts from ADFS and using your Windows directory as the be-all and end-all list of students, there is the ability to add in direct local accounts into OpenAthens. So you can either upload through a spreadsheet if you have quite a number of alumni, or just add them individually as users. And what that will give them is it will mimic the account of somebody who's hooked in from a local authentication, but then you can add and disable them separately from having to request any user details being amended on your user directory itself. So you can use that as kind of like a casual user access if you'd like to, instead of adding one, setting them up properly as a Windows account.
Okay, fantastic. But the functionality is there if an organization has multiple different identity providers for things like affiliates and overseas campuses, if they need to plug those different identity providers into OpenAthens, they can do that.
You mean sorry, like the on-site identity provider? But yeah, sorry, yeah, you can. You can add in different APIs or SAML connected applications for user details.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. So another question: how can we securely manage more than one administrator account in OpenAthens? E.g., I need to give someone just access to the reporting tools. Sam, do you want to have a go at this?
I would believe that would be resolved under the new multi-admin release, but unfortunately that's not something that I know entirely about because I haven't worked on that part of it yet. But reporting traditionally has only been available to the admin view, but with our new multi-admin feature, I would imagine that's something that tackles, but we'd have to come back to you specifically about how that works.
Okay, yeah, and I mean, as I understand it, the multiple administrator functionality is much requested and has been over the years. It's being rolled out currently. I know we're already in the process of migrating some of our organizations that use OpenAthens. So that functionality of being able to define multiple people to log into the admin portion of OpenAthens is certainly being rolled out at the moment. So another question: how can we mitigate the confusion users experience when the institution is part of more than one federation? Good question. Mark, do you want to have a go on that?
So I miss. Okay. Essentially, if you're registered in UK Federation, unless you've told us not to, your IDP or SP is exported to Edugain. That will mean it'll be coming up in the Edugain feed, and Edugain consumes basically the first federation which exports it, which will be us if you registered with us. So let us know if that's happening, and we'll contact other federations. We do have service providers, particularly who are unintentionally in multiple federations and don't need to be. Some want to be in multiple federations, and we'll have different entity IDs. But the key thing is to have a unique entity ID, obviously, for your SP. Sam?
Yeah, I mean, I know personally I've come across this problem before where we've set somebody up in the OpenAthens Federation and they might go to a publisher and click the shibboleth button, and then obviously that doesn't work. It's hard to resolve all those problems, but in the ideal scenario, we'd just create the OpenAthens entity ID so it's the same value as the UK Federation one. So for any publisher that consumes metadata and updates those values, they'll have the exact same path for both federations. So the user's experience, whether they click Shibboleth or OpenAthens, is if they're set up in both of those federations, which we can do very easily, then they will just skip straight through to whatever your authentication point is because they're taking the same route through both federations.
Exactly. And if you do have that problem, again, let us know. We're literally in the same organization now. So if you let us know, we'll make sure we're joining the dots.
Great. Okay, so we've got 5 minutes left, so we've got time for a couple more questions. So next one is, when controlling the search of institutions, i.e. which organizations appear when looking to log in, is this controlled at the platform level, the publication level, or can it be curated within the federation itself? Bark, do you want to have a go on that?
You mean does the caller mean identifying their host institution, or they're looking at resource providers?
Yeah, I think as I'm reading it, I think it's I think they're talking about logging in through the "Where Are You From" service on a publisher's website.
Oh, okay. So ideally, again, publishers may well be using. We have a default central discovery service. We encourage publishers to actually run their own code, and then they can limit it to their subscribers. And again, if you've got multiple campuses, etc., talk to us. I think I've lost everybody.
Oh, we can still hear you.
I can still hear.
Oh, it just went back. So if you've got multiple campuses, again, talk to us. We can talk to the publishers and ensure that the metadata and the entity domains are being displayed correctly. So the institution that your, say, users are looking for is the one they expect to see. And we're seeing that now as quite an issue, for example, in the further education sector, where we've got colleges which are perhaps in a group and there's 4 or 5, but actually they've still got very unique identities, and that's how they'll do discovery.
Okay, fantastic. So I think we've got time for one more question. So I think this one's for you, Mark. It says, what do you find is the biggest barrier to entry for joining the UK Federation? And then the follow-up is, does that change from a publisher's perspective versus a library's perspective, or is it the same barrier?
No, they do. I mean, I suspect for publishers, particularly small publishers, it can be cost, because somewhere along the line they've got to pay somebody to do it. Frankly, I think sometimes publishers are driven towards more costly solutions. I think they've got Schindler for free if they can deploy it, and they've got more cost-effective ones, again, offered by Jisc. For the institutions, I'm not going to put words into institutions' mouths. They'll all have different challenges. It can be institutional resource, but the key thing is to actually have a proper directory structure and know who your users are. And with institutions, often that's more challenging, because for them to get value, they need to be able to define user groups and give roles to students or staff, or, as we've been talking about, alumni, and that's where the real granularity comes in.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good answer. I don't know, Sam, if you've got any kind of experience with that. If there's an implementation that you start where there isn't a kind of well-organized user directory in the first place, how would you go about addressing that during the implementation for OpenAthens? Are you working with the organization to sort of to organize that data, or would you do something else?
Yeah, that is a good question, and it's something I came across recently as well. So it was a Google's workspace being used as user directory, and of course the world around attributes or plugging in anything SAML application wise might be something that they've not played around with or investigated before. So it's a world that can be quite unfamiliar, but obviously by introducing the need for them to release attributes to online portals, then we went through and discovered quite a few things about their user directory that they weren't using at all, to separate users into groups, like you said. And then now we've got attribute releases for instructor roles and things like this that they never would have sort of looked into using before, and they may never use it again, but it's an area that they've never quite investigated. So just by having the need to then start using it, then they've sort of unlocked this whole area of functionality they may have ignored before.
Perfect. Okay. Well, thank you both for answering our questions. So everybody else who's joining us, I think if you click the back to timeline arrow, then you'll be able to go back to the timeline and join us a little bit later for our other sessions. Thank you.
Thanks very much.